Mr. Ham here to talk you through the history of communist China. So today we're going to spend some time talking about why China is a communist country and why that's important and how it kind of interacts with our time period that we're spending on right now. So a little background for you on China. For thousands of years, China has been ruled by different dynasties of emperors. So there'd be an emperor in a city, and he would have complete control over the country. And this would go on for literally thousands of years, going back to kind of before a lot of recorded history even. But that changes in 1912. The Qing Empire, which is the final Chinese empire, has collapsed. It has been fighting foreign wars, wars inside, and everything like that. And finally, in 1912, the government there collapses. It falls apart. And so what ends up happening is China kind of shatters at this time period. Remember, we've talked about a lot of different things like the Opium Wars, things like a lot of these internal struggles in China, and finally it all kind of gets to China, and it falls apart. And so you can see on this map here all these different bubbles, these red and blue bubbles, and these are each separate warlords. So these are groups that are controlled by people that have a strong military, and that's really it. And they would have a government maybe set up in place, but otherwise it would just be kind of local rulers. So one city would have different rules from another one. They might like each other, they might not. They'd be fighting. There was no government of China really at this time. So this is known as the warlord era. So China didn't really have much of a central government. What was left of it was kind of fighting for power and everything like that, along with all of these warlords. So this is in 1912. So this is even before World War I really gets started. This happens. So there's two names really that you need to know throughout all this. One is a guy named Chiang Kai-shek, and he eventually becomes the leader of what is known as the Republic of China. And we'll talk about what happens there, but essentially what he does is he reunites China during this warlords era. So he goes and he fights these warlords, he has diplomacy with them, he has conversations with them, and eventually he reunifies China into the Republic of China. So there's not an emperor anymore, but there is now a Republic of China. So that's what China becomes after this warlords era. That warlords era lasts about 10 years. So about 10 to 15 years or so, Chiang Kai-shek is fighting against these warlords and kind of bringing them all into power. And eventually he becomes the leader of the Republic of China. The other name that you need to know is a guy named Mao Zedong. And he's a leader of the communist uprising in China. So Mao Zedong is an important person because he eventually becomes the leader of the communist-led China, and he's a leader during this time period fighting against Chiang Kai-shek. So the history of this is really interesting because almost immediately after Chiang Kai-shek kind of reunifies China, he begins to get attacked by these communists. These communists don't have a government. They barely have leadership, but there are different pockets of them, as you can see on this map, kind of around the country. And what they would do is they'd have basically they'd pop up, they would fight the Republic's army, and then they'd run away. And this fighting would continue for about 10 years. But then all of a sudden, the fighting pauses in 1937. So you might ask, why would this fighting pause? You know, these people hate each other. There's this Republic of China versus these communists, and they are bitter, bitter enemies. So what happens? Well, they get invaded. They get invaded by the Japanese. So if you remember, Japan during this time is very, very aggressively expanding, and so you learned about a little bit of the United States and their fight in the Pacific, places like Wake Island over here, places like Okinawa and everything. But Japan was expanding even beyond that, and so Japan expanded all the way into China. So all this red that you can see really up here and along the coast was Japan's expansion into China. They sent their army in there and they invaded. And this is even before World War II started. So 1937, this was happening. And so these two sides put away their differences. The Republic and these communists put away their differences. They recognize that there's a bigger threat now to China, and it's the Japanese. And so they have the Second Sino-Japanese War. There was another one fought back in the 1800s. Also, whenever you see this term Sino, so S-I-N-O, sometimes it might be confusing. Just think Chinese. Sino just means Chinese. So you'll hear about Sino languages. You'll hear about the Sino-Japanese War, things like that. it means Chinese. So this is the second Chinese-Japanese war. And this lasts for 8 years because eventually it becomes a part really of World War II. After Japan bombs Pearl Harbor, China enters into World War II on the side of the Americans and the Allies, and so they're fighting Japan, and this is a brutal war, guys. There is thousands that are killed, enslaved, and everything like that all throughout China. But during this whole time, there's this kind of loose alliance between the Republic and the Communists. And they are not friends by any means. They just kind of recognize what they have to do in order to, get through this. So it isn't really a surprise when after the Japanese are defeated, the fighting resumes. So the fighting picks up after the Japanese have been defeated. And so this 8-year period, this kind of peace between these two sides is gone. And during those 8 years, though, some things happen between these two sides. While Chiang Kai-shek is leading China against the Japanese, Mao Zedong and the communists are really kind of preparing. They know that once this fighting is over, they are going to be fighting against the Republic. Chiang Kai-shek doesn't really have that ability to do that. And so once the fighting resumes, you can see this map over here. The red here is the communists and the blue is the Republic. The Republic's army is weakened, and they basically get chased down the coast. They would get surrounded here, and they'd get pushed down. They get surrounded here, they'd get pushed down. And eventually they are in a little pocket here on the coast, and they flee. They run to this island here known as Taiwan. So Taiwan's that island right there off the coast of China. And once that happens, once the Republic Army and Chiang Kai-shek are essentially defeated, they are forced onto Taiwan. Mao Zedong declares the People's Republic of China on September 21st of 1949. He establishes himself as chairman, and he forces the Republic to live on Taiwan. Now, a little bit of modern history. So China is still known as the People's Republic of China. It is still a communist country. If you go there, you will see pictures of Mao Zedong all over the place. His book is the second most popular book in the world next to the Bible because of his impact on China. If you go to Taiwan, however, they claim that they are the Republic of China. So there are technically, if you go, there is kind of two Chinas. There is the tiny little island of Taiwan that claims that they are China because they were technically never defeated. And then there is, of course, the People's Republic of China, which is what we think of China today. These two are not friends, but they are not actively fighting either. So this is still extending on through today.